事啊？
咩事啊？大家好，
大家好，
又你讀你聽嘅時間啦。
係
咩事啊？你話
咩事啊
？Charles Dickens 嘅 Great Expectations 啊，讀到第30節啦，我哋第29次錄音。上一次發生咩事啊？
咩事啊？佢好似就係見到啊 Estella 之後，覺得佢靚到唔同咗樣咁
係啦，
之後食飯
其實即係唔係靚到唔同咗，係佢認唔到佢啊！一開始啊，即係哇變咗完全變咗另一個人咁樣，但係更加靚，更加靚咁樣。咪順序講啦，發生咩事就係佢阿 Pip 去咗見 Miss Havisham 啊嘛，順序講係嘛，終於去咗見 Miss Havisham 啦，即係見到 Miss Havisham 啦，見到 Estella 啦。見到 Mrs. Pocket 啦，即係住喺嗰度嗰啲人啦，係咪啊？咁咯。
咁佢哋覺得佢好唔同啊嘛。
係啦，咁然之後再晏少少，阿 Mr. Jaggers 都嚟咗喎，係咪啊？咁佢哋4個一齊喺度做咩啊？玩牌，係咪？
之後點啊？咁咯。
咁梗係唔係淨止係咁啦？咁佢就感覺到 Mr. Jaggers 對於呢個長大咗嘅 Estella 懷有一個隔膜啦，
哦係啊，
唔知係咪敵意啦，但係總之係一種隔膜心啦。咁點解？就因為佢好明顯見到阿 Pip 流晒口水啦。咁如果 Pip 流晒口水，即係意味住咩啊 ？Pip 可能會娶 Estella 啦，即係如果阿 Estella 肯嫁嘅話。咁但係呢個似乎係 Miss Havisham 嘅意願啦，就係撮合佢兩個啦，係咪？咁阿 Mr. Jaggers 係作為阿 Pip 嘅監護人，佢覺得佢係有呢個 say 噶嘛，喺呢個關係入面。係。咁佢會做啲咩？佢咪就係要即係我哋通俗啲講，我哋現代嘅講法就係要起下佢底先啦。Estella 究竟係咩一回事啦？咁阿 Pip 就只係由到尾好弱咁問咗一句啫，就係、其實 Estella 係唔係一個 Havisham？ 係咪？咁而呢個 Jaggers 就證實咗話係咁我信 Mr. Jaggers 佢有做功課嘅，佢唔會 Miss Havisham 話係嘅咁好啦，咁佢既然係一個 Havisham， 即係意味住咩？咁佢都係一個貴族啊，即係佢都係一個有錢出身嘅人啊，咁理論上就應該問題不大喎。咁但係 Jaggers 表現出嚟嘅唔係咁樣喎，咁究竟仲有啲咩問題？咁但係而家接落嚟嘅似乎唔係講呢樣嘢住，而家接落嚟嘅就係阿 Pip 太開心啦，佢要將呢個開心話俾邊個聽啊？
做啊！
係啦，咁點解佢要尋求阿 Jo 啊？就係因為佢嘅監護人 Jaggers 似乎唔係好承認，
唔係好 approve，
係啊，唔係好 approve，
就會好為佢，
但係佢就會覺得阿 Jo 會係咪？同埋呢一件事都係呢一個約會都係阿 Jo
arrange。
係啦，即係唔係阿 Jo arrange 啦，即係阿 Jo 撮合而成啦。因為阿 Jo 係傳話一個啊嘛，係咪？咁佢會直覺會覺得阿 Jo 會恭喜佢，而佢好需要呢個支持咁即係其實意味住咩？即係意味住阿 Pip 接落嚟係會行動嘅，佢嘅行動就係要迎娶 Estella 嘅，即係佢會盡佢嘅能量去做呢件事啦。係，好冇？咁呢個就係似乎就係最大推動呢個故事嘅力量啦，就係阿 Pip 大個仔要娶老婆啦。即係
愛情故事。
喺呢一刻係，但係同時間亦都係階級鬥爭。而佢嘅對手今次就係 Mr. Jaggers 啦，好不幸。好啦，我哋繼續讀落去啦，好冇？After well considering the matter while I was dressing at the Blue Ball in the morning， 即係 the matter 就係佢要娶 Estella 啦，佢要接落嚟點做啦。I resolved to tell my guardian that I doubted Oleg's being the right sort of man to fill a post of trust at Miss Havisham's。第一件事就係督 Oleg 背脊先，漏咗提 Oleg 做咗 Miss Havisham 嘅管家，或者唔係管家啦，即係做佢保鏢啦做佢看門，做佢看更啦。Why, of course, he is not the right sort of man, Pip, said my guardian, comfortably satisfied beforehand on the general head. Because the man who fills the post of trust never is the right sort of man. It seemed quite to put him into spirits to find that this particular post was not exceptionally held by the right sort of man, and he listened in a satisfied manner while I told him what knowledge I had of Oleg。 即係佢認識 Oleg 啦，好明顯阿 Pip， 即係都唔知佢會唔會提翻起阿 Biddy 嘅恐懼啦。但係 Oleg 蛇咁醉酒啊，呢個係肯定。Very good, Pip, he observed. When I had concluded, I'll go round presently and pay my friend off, and pay our friend off. 即係可能塞啲錢打發佢走。Rather alarmed by this summary action, I was for a little delay, and even hinted that our friend himself might be difficult to deal with. Oh no, he won't, said my guardian, making his pocket handkerchief point with perfect confidence. I should like to see him argue the question with me. As we were going back together to London by the midday coach, and as I breakfasted under such terrors of Pumblecook that I could scarcely hold my cup, this gave me an opportunity of saying that I wanted a walk, and that I would go on along the London road while Mr. Jaggers was occupied, if he would let the coachman know that I would get into my place when overtaken. I was thus enabled to fly from the Blue Boar immediately after breakfast. By then, making a loop of about a couple of miles into the open country at the back of Pumblecook's premises, I got round into the High Street again, a little beyond that pitfall, and felt myself in comparative security. It was interesting to be in the quiet old town once more, and it was not disagreeable to be here and there suddenly recognized and stared after. One or two of the tradespeople even darted out of their shops and went a little way down the street before me, that they might turn, as if they had forgotten something, and pass me face to face, on which occasions I don't know whether they or I made the worst pretense, they of not doing it, or I of not seeing it. Still, my position was a distinguished one, and I was not at all dissatisfied with it until fate threw me in the way of what unlimited miscreant Trapp's boy。 Trapp's boy 即係嗰個裁縫個仔啦，即係當日阿 Pip 去做衫嗰陣時見過兩父子。Casting my eyes along the street at a certain point of my progress, I beheld Trapp's boy approaching, lashing himself with an empty blue bag. Deeming that a serene and unconscious contemplation of him would best beseem me, and would be most likely to quell his evil mind, I advanced with that expression of countenance, and was rather congratulating myself on my success, when suddenly the knees of Trapp's boy smote together, his hair uprose, his cap fell off, he trembled violently in every limb, staggered out into the road, and crying to the populace, "Hold me, I'm so frightened!" feigned to be in a paroxysm of terror and contrition, occasioned by the dignity of my appearance as I passed him. His teeth loudly chattered in his head, and with every mark of extreme humiliation, he prostrated himself in the dust. This was a hard thing to bear, but this was nothing. I had not advanced another 200 yards when, to my inexpressible terror, amazement, and indignation, I again beheld Trapp's boy approaching. He was coming round a narrow corner. His blue bag was slung over his shoulder, honest industry beamed in his eyes, a determination to proceed to Trapp's with cheerful briskness was indicated in his gait. When a shock, he became aware of me, and was severely visited as before, but this time his motion was rotatory, and he staggered round and round me with knees more afflicted, and with uplifted hands as if beseeching for mercy. His sufferings were hailed with the greatest joy by a knot of spectators, and I felt utterly confounded. 好誇張喎呢度寫到，即係講阿 Trap 見到阿 Pip 嗰個反應有啲誇張。I had not got as much further down the street as the post office when I again beheld Trap's boy shooting round by a back way. This time he was entirely changed. He wore the blue bag in the manner of my greatcoat, and was strutting along the pavement towards me on the opposite side of the street, attended by a company of delighted young friends, to whom he from time to time exclaimed, with a wave of his hand, "Don't know yet." Words cannot state the amount of aggravation and injury wreaked upon me by Trapp's boy. When passing abreast of me, he pulled up his shirt collar, twined his side hair, stuck an arm akimbo, and smirked extravagantly by, wriggling his elbows and body, and drawling to his attendants, "Don't know ya, don't know ya. Upon my soul, don't know ya." The disgraced attendant on his immediately afterwards sticking to crowing, and pursuing me across the bridge of crows, as from an exceedingly dejected fowl who had known me when I was a blacksmith, culminated a disgrace with which I left the town, and was, so to speak, ejected by it into the open country.
即係點啊？
即係一開始佢見到阿 Pip 係好驚喜嘅，但係然之後佢就開始走埋去，即係去研究阿 Pip 啦。到第三次咧，佢就發現呢個人對佢係呢個 Traps boy 係對佢係敵意嘅，因為佢覺得阿 Pip 唔識人啦，所以開始扮佢啦。即係 Traps 扮佢好似好高竇咁樣，我唔識你哋嘅，我唔識你哋嘅咁樣，你明唔明啊？即係好短時間就有呢三個轉變，但係當然其中之一個原因就係因為阿 Pip 冇同佢打招呼啦，即係或者冇同佢好好地傾偈啦。But unless I had taken the life of Traps boy on that occasion, I really do not even now see what I could have done save endure. To have struggled with him in the street, or to have exacted any lower recompense from him than his heart's best blood, would have been futile and degrading. Moreover, he was a boy whom no man could hurt, an invulnerable and dodging serpent who, when chased into the corner, flew out again between his captor's legs, scornfully yelping. I wrote, however, to Mr. Traps by next day's post to say that Mr. Pip must decline to deal further with one who could so far forget what he owed to the best interests of society as to employ a boy who excited loathing in every respectable mind. 即係佢都有寫信去鬧 Q 佢。The coach, with Mr. Jaggers inside, came up in due time and took my box seat again and arrived in London safe, but not sound, for my heart was gone. As soon as I arrived, I sent a penitential codfish and barrel of oysters to Joe, and then went on to Bernard's Inn. I found Herbert dining on cold meat， 即係話原來佢翻咗去咯喎，佢冇去見阿 Jo 喎。
佢就 send 咗啲。
係啦，佢決定都係唔見阿 Jo， 因為佢一路行嗰陣時，阿 Traps boy 都令到佢覺得都係咯，同埋 Mr. Jaggers 原來都接咗佢走啦。I found Herbert dining on cold meat and delighted to welcome me back. Having dispatched the Avenger to the coffee house for an addition to the dinner, I felt that I must open my breast that very evening to my friend and chum. 即係佢諗住同阿 Herbert 講發生咩事啦，諗住啊。As confidence was out of the question with the Avenger in the hall, which could merely be regarded in the light of an antechamber to the keyhole, I sent him to the play. A better proof of the severity of my bondage to that taskmaster could scarcely be afforded than the degrading shifts to which I was constantly driven to find him employment. So mean is extremity that I sometimes sent him to Hyde Park Corner to see what o'clock it was. Dinner done, and we sitting with our feet upon the fender, I said to Herbert, "My dear Herbert, I have something very particular to tell you." "My dear Handel," he returned, "I shall esteem and respect your confidence." "It concerns myself, Herbert," said I, and one other person. Herbert crossed his feet, looked at the fire with his head on one side, and having looked at it in vain for some time, looked at me because I didn't go on. "Herbert," said I, laying my hand upon his knee, I adore Estella." Instead of being transfixed, Herbert replied in an easy matter-of-course way, "Exactly. Well?" "Well, Herbert, is that all you say? Well?" "What next, I mean," said Herbert. "Of course I know that." "How do you know it?" said I. "How do I know it, Handel? Why, from you." "I never told you." "Told me? You have never told me when you've got your hair cut, but I have had sense to perceive it. You have always adored her, ever since I've known you. You brought your adoration and your portmanteau here together. Told me? Why, you have always told me all day long. When you told me your own story, you told me plainly that you began adoring her the first time you saw her, when you were very young indeed." "Very well then," said I, to whom this was a new and not unwelcoming light. "I have never left off adoring her, and she has come back, a most beautiful and most elegant creature, and I saw her yesterday, and if I adored her before, I now doubly adore her." "Lucky for you then, Handel," said Herbert, "that you are picked out for her and allotted to her. Without encroaching on forbidden ground, we may venture to say that there can be no doubt between ourselves of the fact. Have you any idea yet of Estella's views on the adoration question? I shook my head gloomily. Oh, she is thousands of miles away from me, said I. Patience, my dear Handel. Time enough. But you have something more to say. I am ashamed to say it, I returned, and yet it's no worse to say it than to think it. You call me a lucky fellow. Of course I am. I was a blacksmith boy but yesterday. I am, what shall I say I am today? Say a good fellow, if you want a phrase, returned Herbert, smiling and clapped his hand on the back of mine. A good fellow, with impetuosity and hesitation, boldness and diffidence, action and dreaming, curiously mixed in him. I stopped for a moment to consider whether there really was this mixture in my character. On the whole, I by no means recognized the analysis, but thought it not worth disputing. When I ask what I am to call myself today, Herbert, I went on, I suggest what I have in my thoughts. You say I'm lucky. You know I have done nothing to raise myself in life, and that fortune alone has raised me. That is being very lucky. And yet, when I think of Estella, then, my dear Herbert, I cannot tell you how dependent and uncertain I feel, and how exposed to hundreds of chances, avoiding forbidden ground as you did just now. I may still say that on the constancy of one person all my expectations depend, and at the best, how indefinite and unsatisfactory only to know so vaguely what they are. In saying this, I relieved my mind of what had always been there, more or less, though no doubt most since yesterday. Now, Handel, Herbert replied in his gay, hopeful way, it seems to me that in the despondency of the tender passion, we are looking into our gift-horse mouths with a magnifying glass. Likewise, it seems to me that concentrating our attention on the examination, we altogether overlook one of the best points of the animal. Didn't you tell me that your guardian, Mr. Jaggers, told you in the beginning that you were not endowed with expectations only? And even if he had not told you so, though this is very large if I grant, could you believe that all men in London, Mr. Jaggers is the man to hold his present relations towards you unless he was sure of his ground? I said I could not deny that this was a strong point. I said it like a rather reluctant concession to truth and justice, as if I wanted to deny it. I should think it was a strong point, said Herbert, and I should think you would be puzzled to imagine a stronger. As to the rest, you must bide your guardian's time, and he must bide his client's time. You'll be a 1 in 20 before you know where you are, and then perhaps you'll get some further enlightenment. At all events, you'll be near getting it, for it must come at last. What a hopeful disposition you have, said I, gratefully admiring his cheery ways. I ought to have, said Herbert, for I have not much else. I must acknowledge, by the by, that the good sense of what I have just said is not my own, but my father's. The only remark I ever heard him make on your story was the final one. The thing is settled and done. Or Mr. Jaggers would not be in it. And now, before I say anything more about my father or my father's son and repay confidence with confidence, I want to make myself seriously disagreeable to you for a moment, positively repulsive. You won't succeed, said I. Oh, yes, I shall, said he. 1, 2, 3, and now I am in for it. Handel, my good fellow. Though he spoke in his light tone, he was very much in earnest. I have been thinking since we have been talking with our feet on this fender that Estella surely cannot be a condition of your inheritance if she was never referred to by your guardian. Am I right in so understanding what you have told me, as that he never referred to her directly or indirectly in any way? Never even hinted, for instance, that your patron might have views as to your marriage ultimately? Never. Now, Handel, I am quite free from the flavors of sour grapes, upon my soul and honor. Not being bound to her, can you not detach yourself from her? I told you I should be disagreeable. I turned my head aside, for with a rush and a sweep, like the old marsh winds coming up from the sea, a feeling like that which had subdued me on the morning when I left the forge, when the mists were solemnly rising, and when I laid my hand upon the village finger-post, smote upon my heart again. There was silence between us for a little while. Yes, but my dear Handel, Herbert went on, as if we had been talking instead of silent, It's having been so strong-rooted in the breast of a boy whom nature and circumstances made so romantic renders it very serious. Think of her bringing up, and think of Miss Havisham. Think of what she is herself. This may lead to miserable things. I know it, Herbert, said I, with my head still turned away, but I can't help it. You can't detach yourself? No, impossible. You can't try, Handel? No, impossible. Well, said Herbert, getting up with a lively shake as if he had been asleep and stirring the fire. Now I'll endeavour to make myself agreeable again. So he went round the room and shook the curtains out, but put the chairs in their places, tidied the books and so forth that were lying out, looked into the hall, peeped into the letterbox, shut the door, and came back to his chair by the fire, where he sat down, nursing his left leg in both arms. I was going to say a word or two, Handel, concerning my father's and my father's son. I am afraid it is scarcely necessary for my father's son to remark that my father's establishment is not particularly brilliant in its housekeeping. There is always plenty, Herbert, said I, to say something encouraging. Oh, yes, and so the dustman says, I believe, with the strongest approval, and so does the marine store shop in the back street. Gravely, Handel, for the subject is grave enough. You know how it is as well as I do. I suppose there was a time once when my father had not given matters up, but if ever there was, the time is gone. May I ask you if you have ever had an opportunity of remarking down in your part of the country that the children of not exactly suitable marriages are always most particularly anxious to be married? This was such a singular question that I asked him in return. Is it so? I don't know, said Herbert. That's what I want to know, because it is decidedly the case with us. My poor sister Charlotte, who was next to me and died before she was 14, was a striking example. Little Jane is the same. In a desire to be matrimonially established, you might suppose her to have passed her short existence in a perpetual contemplation of domestic bliss. Little Alec, in a frock, has already made arrangements for his union with a suitable young person at Kew. And indeed, I think we are all engaged, except the baby. Then you are, said I. I am, said Herbert, but it's a secret. I assured him of my keeping the secret and begged to be favoured with further particulars. He had spoken so sensibly and feelingly of my weakness that I wanted to know something about his strength. May I ask the name? I said. Name of Clara, said Herbert. Life in London? Yes, perhaps I ought to mention, said Herbert, who had become curiously crestfallen and meek since we entered on the interesting theme, that she's rather below my mother's nonsensical family notions. Her father had to do with the victualling of passenger ships. I think he was a species of pursuer. What is he now? Said I. He's an invalid now, replied Herbert. Living on the first floor, said Herbert, which was not at all what I meant, for I had intended my question to apply to his means. I have never seen him, for he has always kept his room overhead since I have known Clara, but I have heard him constantly. He makes tremendous roars and pegs at the door with some frightful instrument. In looking at me and then laughing heartily, Herbert for the time recovered his usual lively manner. Don't you expect to see him? Said I. Oh yes, I constantly expect to see him, returned Herbert, because I never hear him, without expecting him to come tumbling through the ceiling, but I don't know how long the rafters may hold. When he had once more laughed heartily, he became meek again, and told me that the moment he began to realize capital, it was his intention to marry this young lady. He added as a self-confident proposition and engendering low spirits, but you can't marry, you know, while you're looking about you. As we contemplated the fire, and as I thought what a difficult vision to realize this same capital sometimes was, I put my hands in my pockets, a folded piece of paper in one of them attracting my attention. I opened it and found it to be the playbill I had received from Joe, relative to the celebrated provincial amateur of Rossian renown. And bless my heart, I voluntarily added aloud, it's tonight. This changed the subject in an instant, and made us hurry resolved to go to the play. So, when I had pledged myself to comfort and abet Herbert in the affair of his heart by all practicable and impracticable means, and when Herbert had told me that his Athens already knew me by reputation, and that I should be presented to her. And when we had warmly shaken hands upon our mutual confidence, we blew out our candles, made up our fire, locked our door, and issued forth in quest of Mr. Wopsle and Denmark.咁啊，即係話佢哋去睇個 play 喎，而家準備去睇個 play。咁呢個 play 同 Mr. Wopsle 有啲關係啦，係咪 ？Mr. Wopsle 有份演出定係寫啊？咁啊，佢同 Herbert 講咗啦 ，instead of 同阿 Joe 講啦。咁啊，同 Herbert 講晒。咁啊 ，Herbert 嘅反應就係、我早知你中意佢啦，咁你點做至得㗎？咁佢梗係想同佢一齊啦，娶佢啦。咁但係 Herbert 就 warn 佢啦，就係話你究竟知唔知道你而家發咗職啦，係咪？但係你知唔知道你嗰個發職嘅條件係咪需要你同邊個人一齊咧？又或者需要你同邊個人原因咧？係唔係有指明咧？跟住阿 Pip 話冇喎，你肯定你要搞清楚呢件事先喎。因為如果你萬一你做錯呢個決定咧，可能會影響你嘅 inheritance 嘅喎。你明唔明啊？佢就係講呢樣嘢啫。咁然之後就搞到阿 Pip 即刻好似阿 Pip 原本係話但係我唔理，我都係唔可以唔諗佢。咁但係難免都係竟然令到阿 Pip 都係有少少卻步，即係有少少點講啊？有少少擔心啊！咁啊令我覺得哇，咁其實你嘅動力都唔係好大喎，即係佢應該係發咗狂咁啊！你做乜講啲嘢打佢個身啊？又或者我唔理啊，即係咁啊！但係佢只不過係好激動咁話 impossible， 我唔可以唔諗佢。講咗2次，然之後就都係我都係諗諗先。即係所以阿 Pip 究竟有幾中意 Estella， 可能冇我想象中唔中意嚇。然之後佢哋就會講但係又調翻轉講，即係佢哋喺呢個年紀雖然仲係好細，即係18歲未到，係咪？但係講到談婚論嫁咧，喺呢個 Victorian 年代咧係好 common 嘅。因為 Herbert 就由佢啲姊妹講起啦，佢兩個妹一個14歲死咗，但係嗰陣時佢已經係想嫁，即係或者有婚約在身㗎。搞到佢另外一個妹而家都一日到黑就係諗住要嫁出去。佢話佢屋企唯一一個冇嫁出去嘅兄弟咧，就係佢個 BB 嘅啫，個 BB 未有婚約在身嘅啫。咁阿 Pip 就話嚇乜你有婚約在身咩？阿 Herbert 佢話係啊，但係呢個係秘密嚟嘅，你唔可以話俾人聽嘅，即係咁樣。即係似乎即係佢哋呢一刻無端端就係俾一個訊息俾讀者，就係喺呢個年代呢啲小朋友係將婚姻擺喺好前。即係擺喺即係喺個年紀上擺得好前，即係14歲甚至乎10歲開始諗12、3、4歲開始去行動。係嚇咁而點解會做呢個行為咧？就係因為要確立自己喺社會嘅身份。明唔明啊？即係作為一個男人要成家立室啦，作為一個女人就係你要嫁出去啊嘛。咁你先有嗰個社會價值啊嘛，因為女人喺嗰個年代嘅工作都係好 limited 噶嘛，男人出去做嘢啫，女人係冇嘢做噶嘛，即係或者喺佢社會上揾唔到嘢做，咁佢哋嘅職能變咗係咩啊？就係結婚生仔即係維持住屋企咯。但係佢用呢個手法去講，佢用呢個手法去講。咁接落嚟就暫時就拖一拖劇情先啦，去睇下 play 先啦，又見下啲豬朋狗友啊，講下傾下偈啊，睇下倫敦發生咩事先。佢已經翻去倫敦啊嘛。咁然之後，但係呢個對話好明顯係仲未完啦，佢哋會繼續傾啦。即係阿 Herbert 似乎係好有彈性嘅，即係佢講咗 pro and con 都講晒。然之後，阿 Herbert 都話：嗱，我而家又做翻 pro 啦，我而家幫你諗點。即係佢話，既然你唔能夠忘記 Estella， 唔可以 detach， 即係你要冒一切危險都要同佢一齊嘅，咁我支持你咯。呢個就係 Herbert 咯。 就係咁。
係。
咁我哋繼續睇啦，好嘛？下個禮拜好再講，拜拜。